On a cold and magical night of Christmas Eve, when the streets were glowing with lights and laughter echoed through every corner, a quiet, humble-looking man named Daniel walked into an upscale restaurant, dressed in worn-out clothes and simple shoes, his appearance deceiving everyone around him, because in reality, he was a billionaire who had chosen to disguise himself to find someone who would love him for who he truly was, not for his wealth or status. He had arranged a blind date through a matchmaking service, hoping that maybe this Christmas would bring him something money never could, a genuine connection. But as soon as his date, a well-dressed and confident woman named Clara, saw him, her smile faded into disappointment, her eyes quickly scanning his outfit with judgment, and within minutes of sitting down, she began making excuses, her tone cold and dismissive, until finally she stood up, embarrassed and annoyed, saying she couldn't waste her time on someone like him, leaving Daniel sitting alone at the table while the festive joy around him suddenly felt distant and hollow. Yet he didn't react with anger, only a quiet sadness, as this wasn't the first time he had been rejected for what people thought he lacked. Just as he was about to leave, a little girl, no older than 7, approached him shyly, holding a small handmade Christmas card. Her innocent eyes filled with warmth as she said she had been watching him sit alone and thought he might need some Christmas cheer, and without hesitation, she handed him the card and gave him a gentle hug, something no one in that room had offered him, not pity, not judgment, just pure kindness. And in that moment, Daniel felt something shift deep inside him, a reminder that true worth isn't measured by appearance or wealth, but by the heart. And as he smiled, touched beyond words, he asked the girl where her parents were, only to learn that she and her struggling single mother were dining on a small budget nearby, trying to make the best of the holiday, which moved him even more. Quietly, Daniel paid for their meal and left a generous gift for them, still without revealing who he truly was. But before leaving, he made a promise to himself that he would continue searching, not for someone impressed by riches, but for someone with a heart like that little girl's, because on that Christmas night, while one woman rejected him for being poor, a child unknowingly gave a billionaire the greatest gift of all, a reason to believe in genuine love again. The next morning, as the soft glow of Christmas Day sunlight filtered through the tall windows of Daniel's penthouse, the events of the previous night lingered in his mind far more vividly than any business deal or financial triumph ever had. And for a man who had spent years building an empire, accumulating wealth beyond imagination, and commanding respect in every room he entered, it was both humbling and transformative to realize that a simple act of kindness from a child had shaken him more deeply than anything else in his carefully controlled world. He stood there in silence, holding the small handmade Christmas card, its uneven edges and colorful scribbles speaking louder than any expensive gift ever could. And for the first time in a long while, Daniel questioned not just the people he surrounded himself with, but the life he had built, one that was filled with luxury yet strangely empty of genuine connection. And so, without hesitation, he made a decision that would alter the course of his life in ways he could never have predicted. He would find that little girl and her mother again, not out of obligation or charity, but because something about them felt real, grounding, and honest in a way he had been searching for his entire life. Meanwhile, across the city, in a modest apartment tucked away in a quiet neighborhood, the little girl, whose name was Sophie, woke up with excitement still sparkling in her eyes, unaware of the profound impact she had made the night before. As she eagerly showed her mother the envelope they had discovered after returning home, her mother, Emma, initially confused, opened it only to find a generous sum of money along with a short handwritten note that simply read, "Thank you for reminding me what Christmas truly means." And as Emma read those words, her heart filled with a mixture of gratitude and curiosity, wondering who this mysterious man was and why he had chosen to help them so generously without expecting anything in return. Yet despite her curiosity, she felt a deep sense of warmth, realizing that there were still good people in the world, people who gave not for recognition, but from the kindness of their hearts. Back in his office later that day, Daniel instructed his assistant to discreetly track down the reservation records from the restaurant, determined to find Sophie and Emma without intruding on their privacy. And after a few hours, he had an address, one that contrasted sharply with the luxurious environments he was accustomed to. Yet instead of hesitation, he felt a sense of anticipation, as though he were about to step into a world that held something he had been missing all along. And when he finally arrived at the modest apartment building, dressed once again in simple clothes, he took a deep breath before knocking on the door, unsure of how he would be received, but certain that he needed to see them again. When Emma opened the door, her initial reaction was one of surprise, quickly followed by recognition, and although she couldn't quite place where she had seen him before, there was something familiar about his presence, something that felt both distant and strangely comforting. And as Sophie peeked from behind her mother, her face lit up instantly, exclaiming with joy that it was the man from the restaurant, the one who had looked so sad. And without hesitation, she ran forward and hugged him again, her innocence breaking down any barriers that might have existed, leaving Emma both touched and slightly cautious. as she invited him inside, unsure of his intentions but unable to ignore the sincerity in his eyes. As they sat together in the small living room, Daniel spoke honestly, explaining that he had been deeply moved by Sophie's kindness and that he simply wanted to thank them properly, not with money, but with genuine gratitude. And as the conversation unfolded, Emma began to see beyond his modest appearance, noticing the way he spoke, the thoughtfulness in his words, and the quiet confidence that hinted at a life far more complex than he initially appeared to have, yet she chose not to question it, instead focusing on the connection that was naturally forming between them, one built not on status or assumptions, but on shared humanity. Over the following weeks, Daniel found himself returning again and again, each visit bringing with it a sense of peace he had never experienced before. He would spend time helping Sophie with her schoolwork, listening to her stories, and sharing simple meals with Emma, who gradually let down her guard, allowing herself to trust him despite the mystery surrounding his life. And for Daniel, these moments became more valuable than any boardroom victory, as he discovered a version of himself that he had long forgotten, a man who could laugh freely, who could care deeply, and who could be appreciated not for what he owned, but for who he truly was. However, as their bond grew stronger, so did the weight of the secret he was keeping, and Daniel knew that sooner or later, the truth about his identity would come to light, a truth that could potentially change everything, and the thought of losing the genuine connection he had built with Emma and Sophie filled him with a fear he had never felt before, because for the first time, he had something real to lose, something that couldn't be replaced or bought, and so he wrestled with the decision of when and how to reveal who he really was, knowing that honesty was the only path forward, yet dreading the possibility that it might shatter the fragile trust they had created. That moment came unexpectedly one afternoon, when Emma, while running errands, happened to pass by a large building displaying a giant billboard featuring Daniel's face, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit, with headlines praising his success as one of the most influential billionaires in the country. And as she stood there in shock, the pieces began to fall into place, the way he carried himself, the subtle hints of wealth she had noticed but dismissed, and suddenly, everything made sense. Yet instead of anger, she felt a deep sense of confusion, wondering why he had chosen to hide such a significant part of his identity from her, and whether the connection they had built was truly real or somehow orchestrated. When Daniel arrived later that evening, he immediately sensed the change in her demeanor, the warmth replaced by a quiet tension, and before he could say anything, Emma confronted him, her voice steady but filled with emotion, asking him why he had lied, why he had pretended to be someone he wasn't. And in that moment, Daniel knew there was no turning back, so he told her everything, the loneliness, the constant judgment, the failed relationships, and his desperate desire to find someone who would see him for more than his wealth. And as he spoke, there was no trace of the powerful businessman the world admired, only a man who was vulnerable, honest, and afraid of losing the only connection that had ever felt real to him. There was a long silence after his confession, one that seemed to stretch endlessly, until Sophie, unaware of the complexity of the situation, simply took Daniel's hand and said that she didn't care if he was rich or poor, because he was kind, and that was all that mattered. And in that simple statement, Emma found clarity, realizing that while his deception had been hurtful, his intentions had never been malicious, and the person she had come to know, the man who had shown up consistently, who had cared deeply, and who had never once made them feel lesser, was real, regardless of his wealth. In the weeks that followed, their relationship evolved into something stronger, built now on honesty and understanding, as Daniel no longer hid his true identity, yet made a conscious effort to ensure that his wealth never overshadowed the authenticity of their connection. He continued to be present in the same simple ways, proving through his actions that nothing about how he felt had changed, and slowly, the doubts faded, replaced by a trust that was deeper and more resilient than before. As time passed, Daniel used his resources not to impress, but to uplift, quietly supporting causes that mattered to Emma, investing in Sophie's education, and creating opportunities for others who, like them, had faced challenges without losing their kindness. And through it all, he remained grounded by the lesson he had learned on that Christmas night, that true wealth lies not in what you have, but in what you give, and in the connections you build along the way. And so, what began as a failed blind date turned into a journey of self-discovery, love, and redemption, proving that sometimes, the most unexpected moments can lead to the most meaningful changes, and that even in a world driven by appearances, genuine kindness has the power to reveal the truth of who we really are, reminding us all that the greatest gifts in life are not the ones we can buy, but the ones we feel in our hearts.